Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of the workshop on land and asset valuation. As Jenny already introduced, a workshop co-hosted by MCDF, ADB, AIIB, and NDB. For those joining us for the first time, last Monday's session focused on the core principles of compensation and replacement cost. Then we talked about the challenges in their application and the significant role of valuation throughout the project lifecycle. We also covered the importance of a well-defined terms of reference for the engagement of valuators in projects with land acquisition, resettlement, and other land restrictions. And finally, the case study from Nepal illustrated the practical challenges and strategic solutions in applying transaction and restoration costs. Some of the key points that our presenters made during these sessions, and I will just go back and list a few bullet points for those who are joining us just today, and as a refresher to those who joined last Monday. So some of the key points that our presenters made include the fact that compensation goes beyond financial remuneration, aiming to restore or enhance the livelihoods of displaced persons. And it's important to consider both immediate and long-term needs of affected communities. The valuation process often faces challenges such as fluctuating market conditions and lack of comparable data. We learned that adopting multiple valuation methods can provide more accurate and reliable compensation assessments. Furthermore, effective project management includes integrating valuation from the planning phase through to execution. So you can't have a project with land acquisition without properly including valuation and valuation experts. What does this mean? This means that basically valuations are reflective of real-time economic conditions and community needs. Rigorous supervision and regular auditing of the valuation processes help uphold the quality and transparency of valuations. This is also very important. Engaging skilled specialists and establishing clear terms of reference are key to maintaining compliance with international standards. And finally, the flexibility that we all need to have and keep in mind in the valuation process is essential to addressing unforeseen changes and ensuring that compensations are fair and timely. Today, we will expand on these discussions and explore the valuation of affected assets, delving into different approaches and their applications. Following that, we will discuss the international valuation standards and their role in ensuring transparency and consistency in valuation practices. As Jenny already mentioned, we encourage you to participate actively by asking questions through the chat function. We will address those questions that are directly related to the presentation topics immediately by our speakers after each session. But for any broader queries or questions, including those from day one and those that you put in your homework form, and any others that arise today, we have, as a reminder, scheduled a dedicated clinic session on day 3, where remaining questions will be addressed comprehensively by both valuation experts, but also by colleagues from ADB, AIB, and NDB, respectively. And again, as last time, we're looking forward to another productive day, and thank you so much for your continued participation. So now as we move to session 1, which is fundamentals of valuation, our speakers today will be, the session today, in fact, will be led by Professor Guoqing from the National Research Center for Resettlement at Hohai University, also consultant to NDB. Ben Elder, who's a professionally qualified chartered surveyor and the current chair of the International Valuations Standards Council's Advisory Forum, who's also doing consultancy to ADB, and with contributions from our colleagues from ADB, Saruhi Hairapetian, Senior Safeguard Specialist Social from the Office of Safeguards at ADB, and Sutran Kwai, Social Development Specialist at the Sustainability and Fiduciary Solutions Department in AIIB. They will discuss the fundamentals of asset valuation, exploring the basics of valuing diverse assets such as property and land, the critical role of evaluators, and the factors influencing valuation. Furthermore, we'll hear about the main functions of asset valuation and break down the 3 core approaches: market, cost, and income. And additionally, our speakers will discuss when each valuation method is appropriate and walk through these essential steps in the valuation process. So with that, dear colleagues, the floor is yours. I believe Professor Shi is opening with the first set of slides. Guoqing is also the Senior ES Specialist at the NDB Bank, and he will also be joining this session. Apologies for that.
Okay, yeah, it's a pleasure to join. And the next, we will talk about the fundamentals of the valuation. So the first actually from some key message also Ines said for the day one. Actually, if we see some key messages from assets valuation, we can say the valuation is the estimate of the value of assets and determines its work. So valuation object is the property, materials, real estate, land, etc. So evaluator is usually performed by a professional appraiser or appraisal agency or firm. So we have many value factors, include the market conditions, include the environment, economic environment, and assets conditions. So we also have many functions for why we do this assets valuation is due to the assets, the trading, leasing, financing, mortgage, insurance, and other transactions and decisions. It can be also used tax revenue and divide the property by the court. So we have three actually major methods: market, income, and cost. So we can see the three keywords is cost, price, value. This is the keywords of the evaluation. So the cost is actually is cost of your product or service. Is the amount of you spend and produce it. The price is your finance reward for provide the product or service. The value is what the customers believe the product or service is worth to them. So this is the key words of the three. So next. So actually how to do evaluation, actually we have the three major, the basic approaches: market, cost, and income. So the market approach is focused on the principle of the marketing, comparison, and substitutions. So it is the comparison method to compare the value between the identical or comparable assets and the subject assets. So it's a comparison, the two assets. So these comparable assets with the same nature and the same class. But actually, it's for them it's difficult. But so it's sometimes we say the same, but it's need to identify. So we need to adjust the market price of the comparable assets because it's some difference. So determine the method to evaluate the value of the sub assets. So actually, this method is to evaluate the value of the subject assets. We use the same nature, same class, comparable assets to determine the value. So this is the market approach. We also have the cost approach. It's based on the consideration of the historical cost and assets loss. So it's reference cost. So many times we cannot find the full market. We use in the reference cost, or we can say the cost approach. So the cost approach refers to the value deducted from the appraisal method to evaluate the current reference cost from existing of the assets to determine the losses value of the appraisal assets, because we need to evaluate of the appraisal assets the value, but we can use the reference cost. So replace this the assets, what kind of cost will be spent. So it's the cost approach. The income approach is concerned with the future income and risks the assets. This is not looking the current marketing price, not only for the represent cost, but we're looking for the future. The future, but it's the income, the current, the income in the future. So it's the most acceptable method because it's You know, we have the assets, we have the income. So then this is acceptable by the customers. So it's reflected to the value of the capital enterprises, but it's to take account of the discount of the future income into present time value, because the income is the future. We have the time value. So it's the current value is you have to take account this is the difference between now and the future. So each approach actually assess evaluation has its specific theoretical basis and application conditions. Later on, Brent and I will share the different this for discussion about this through approach. Now for market approach, the application conditions is we have to have at least 3 comparable assets and also their price. The comparable price are true, are real happens, substantially feasible between sub-assets and comparable assets. So this actually symbolized and the most direct way is to reflect the existing status of the assets to obtain the evaluation parameters and indicators and of the market and understanding accepted easily. Next. So when we can do? So where there is an active market, whatever is the formal market or informal market, but with some conditions. So within those markets, the transactions are similar assets. Recently, arm's length, verifiable, consistent practice. So this is actually, we think about that this have a market. Then what's the approach? What's the process? So we have to take account the rights towards the property. We have the different rights. The quality of the land or age or specification of the buildings and location, because the location is very important, the value difference. The effective data of the price, evidence, actual price, and the valuation data, because the market is a dynamic change. The permitted use or zoning of the each property, because the different property have the different use in the different locations. The curriculum terms under which of the price is determined and the base of the value required. The market condition at the time of the relevant transactions, we have the market, but this is with the time. So the market approach, we have some key steps. First, we need to identify the units of the comparison. Whatever is the, the rooms or square meter or units. So second, to identify the relevant comparables. Third, to perform the comparative analysis. Fourth, make necessary adjustment because there's some similarity, but some difference. Then apply adjustments. Then last one is reconsider of the indication of the value. So it's the 6 key steps. So next one, where we go to the cost approach, we invite the Mr. Ben to give the presentation.
Thank you, Professor Xu. That's a really great introduction. Thank you for that really clear process of looking at the market approach. My role now is to look at the other 2 approaches and look at the cost approach and then the income approach. I think just sort of reflecting on what Professor Xu was saying there, it's really important that two points. We're not trying to turn you all into valuers. We want to turn you into intelligent clients so that you understand the valuation process, but we're not expecting you to leave these workshops as fully qualified valuers. And the second point is to understand that many of the words which we use get used in everyday language. Professor Suhr talked about cost, price, and value. And quite often in everyday life, those are used interchangeably. But as Professor Suhr pointed out, they're not the same when we start to talk about valuation. So again, just really important to capture those concepts. As we start to look at the cost approach, it's also very important to remember that we need to understand what basis of value we're trying to calculate. And you'll remember last week's conversation about reinstatement costs. Rather than necessarily just market value. And most of our conversations today will be about trying to establish the equivalence of market value through these approaches. There are other bases of value, but even when we're looking at the cost approach here, we're not just trying to calculate what it would cost to rebuild or replace the asset. That may be the longer term goal with the policies within the development banks. But when the valuer is looking at the cost approach, they are looking at trying to estimate the market value of the asset under consideration. And Alex Aronson will touch on the basis of value in the second part of this presentation today, so that will become a little clearer after Alex has spoken. But really what we're trying to do here is to look at this very simple process that individuals or organizations would not pay more for an asset than it would for them to actually replace it, to build it themselves. And this is based on historic data of material prices, but also looking at the quality of the building that we're trying to assess. So do we need to consider depreciation? And there are three main types of depreciation. There's physical depreciation, that the structure of the building, is it still physically sound? Functional depreciation, is the building still able to function for the purpose that it was intended? And then economic depreciation, is it still economic to look at the building or the asset to deliver? And again, just picking up that we need to remember here, then this is where some of the confusion starts to come in, that certainly the AIIB policy and the policies of the other banks is around ignoring or not taking into account depreciation. But that's not the valuer's role unless they actually get specific instructions to do so. So again, back to how important those terms of reference are. And if we move to the next slide, please. Looking at the cost approach, when to use it, when there's no active market. So again, many of you will operate in areas where there's no formal active market. There may be an informal market, and again, Professor Xu touched on that actually markets haven't got to be in the formal process. They can be informal markets. Markets have existed for much longer than government databases and cadastral systems. So again, it's important that you talk to the valuers to establish what is the most appropriate valuation approach for the project that you're working on. And again, as we touched on last week, it's very often, I would encourage more than one approach to be considered in any project, to just give some rationale for the decision that will be made in the end to which approach to rely on. And so we're looking at getting the recreating the asset in a reasonably quick time, because if it's going to take too long to deliver the replacement asset, that will not be looking at the same process as actually purchasing something and using the market approach at that point. But again, what is it that we are replacing? Are we trying to replace exactly what is in existence, or actually would we want to look at replacing a modern equivalent? In other words, a building which would be actually provide better facilities, but it may be of a different structure and a different characteristics. And again, we touched on some of those last week when we talked about perhaps a building that hadn't got sanitary toilet facilities built into it, and therefore just looking at replacing what was there would actually not be legal. So looking at what the modern equivalents of the building might be and determining that. So again, these are really key points that need to be understood by you as the instructing party, but also as the valuer for the work that they are going to proceed on. Next slide, please. So what are the key approaches or key steps within the cost approach? Well, first of all, to establish what needs to be replaced. So doing an inventory of what is actually there. And then to calculate the replacement costs, and then to depreciate if relevant, and again under the instructions to see what depreciation might be applied, and those costs fall into more or three categories, sorry: direct costs or direct expenses, materials, product, engineering systems, salaries, etc., health and safety issues, indirect expenses, design, payment for consultants, legal fees, architects' fees, etc., and then finally business profits. But again, I would be giving great caution to looking at using business profits via the cost methods, but it can be done by the experts. Next slide, please. Jumping, that's already you guessed in front of me, so that's great. So applications. So looking at now turning to the income approach, and we'll stop for breath in a moment to see whether there's any questions regarding these three approaches that we've already talked about. But the income approach is looking at the future return, risk, and profits of an asset that are predictable. So again, and I know that some of you have had challenges in certain projects where perhaps individuals have thought that particularly their business might suddenly make a lot more money in a number of years' time, and they were making some investment for that. And is that compensatable or not? Those are quite difficult decisions, but to underpin the assistance in helping those decisions, it's really important that a market value is obtained by looking at what the income flow from that business has been in the past, but also looking forward at the risk attached to whether that income will continue. And I would point out, particularly at this stage, that when you're looking at some of the agricultural businesses, some of the climate change challenges that exist need to be taken into account in the consideration of future incomes, and perhaps greater risk applied to those numbers. That doesn't mean to say that you can't compensate the clients fairly, but whether that comes in the valuation element or whether it comes in the additional payment element is there for making those decisions. Excuse me. So when to use? Looking at the picture there, again, really challenging to see actually which parts of those are which business, and very often smaller businesses will share facilities to try to make that profit. So it's looking at income producing ability of the asset. So is that how much income can that asset produce? And the availability of reasonable projections. So again, and I know this is very challenging for many of the projects that you will have, is that proper accounting records won't be available to you, and you may have to go and do, and I say you, it's probably the valuer that needs to be doing this. The valuer needs to go and do some investigation, some research, and it may be that the suppliers the businesses are telling you some numbers, but maybe there are other numbers which would either reinforce or make you question the original data, perhaps from buyers, from wholesalers who buy the products off the farmer, or perhaps to wholesalers who are selling some of the goods to smaller shops, etc. So again, I'm quite well known for saying that being a valuer is a bit like being Sherlock Holmes, the detective, where you have to go out into the market and you have to find your evidence, and then use that evidence to produce your valuation, but always with the understanding that that valuation might be challenged at some stage. And last week, again, we talked about the auditing process and maybe even the legal process, which a country might be operating under and the valuer has to listen to. And next slide, please. So looking at the key approaches, so looking at the future expected returns from the asset, and then applying a risk assessment to that income. So how likely is it that that income will continue into the future? And as Professor Sherb already said, it's a time-weighted factor. So a dollar in a week's time is not got the same value as a dollar today. So looking at those time-weighted risks, as well as the risks of actually the business continuing to develop. And again, when you look at some of the projects that you are working on, they're very often in very volatile areas where the economies actually change very quickly, either through inflation or deflation, as the case may be. And the interest rates which are being charged. And so those time critical questions which we looked at last week about when is the valuation, what is the date of valuation, and what happens after a valuation has been received, become particularly critical when the income approach is being used as the basis or the approach of valuation. And how long is that profit likely to remain being generated by this business? Or are there going to be competitors who would come in naturally? Or what are the barriers to entry into these markets? So some quite interesting and challenging questions that need to be asked to look at the use of the income approach. Again, the income approach, if I had to make a general statement, which is always very dangerous because somebody will look and see something different, but I would say that the income approach tends to get used in more developed urban areas where there is a clearer element of business transaction. But as I say, very dangerous to say that. And next slide, please. I'm going to pass back to Professor Schur on the valuation of easements. I don't know, shall we just take a moment and just check whether there's any questions from those three approaches before we move into the valuation of easements? Is there any?
Yes, Ben,
yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ben and Professor Schur, for the clear and comprehensive presentation so far. We do have a few questions coming in. So I will read them out. The first question is, if comparable cost is not available, then how to evaluate for the lost assets? And then there's a scenario question, which is a bit long, so I will leave that for last. The next question is then land valuation is mainly based on market approaches, whereas other assets such as structures valuations are based on cost approach, and livelihood losses are based and assessed by income approach. So someone is asking, is this largely true? And the next question is, can you provide two distinct examples to differentiate between market approach and cost approach, as both seem to be interconnected? So maybe I will just leave these three to start with, and then I will read out a couple others that we have as well.
Just like last week, some great questions, quite challenging. Yeah, Professor Sher, I'll take the last one first, and then pass over to you. And that was about the cost. Sorry, can you just remind me what the last question was? Sorry.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So can you provide two distinct examples to differentiate between market approach and cost approach, as both seem to be interconnected?
Thank you. Yeah, they are interconnected. Exactly, but they are different approaches. So the market approach is there to collect comparable market transactions. So is there evidence of something being sold for that amount of money, whether it's a bottle of water or a house? It doesn't really matter. It's that comparable evidence. It's decisions we make every day, thousands of times, when we make decisions about what we will do. Some of those decisions are much bigger, some are much smaller. But if you were, for example, buying a house, you start to look round at what else has been sold in the area before you'd buy. You'd start to look at what was available on the marketplace. But what you're buying there is the right to use those buildings. I used to use the example of a hotel room, in the room is exactly the same today as it is tomorrow, but I've purchased the right to use that hotel room within my contract. So I got the key. I can go into my hotel room tonight, but I can't go in tomorrow because I've checked out. The room is exactly the same. So it's just having those rights to use the asset which hold the value. And so what you're looking at when you're buying a house is you start to look at what other people are paying for the right to use a particular type of building. When you're looking at the cost approach, what you're looking at is going and saying, actually, how much would it cost? I know what the market is, what I'd have to do, but I can't find exactly what I want. So I'm going to look at how much would actually cost me to build that house, and whether I can build it quick enough that I can actually occupy it. And would it cost me more or less to build it myself? And that's where you're starting to look at the cost approach. But you're quite right. When you're looking at the cost approach, you're going into the market and seeing what the cost of the bricks are, the steel, the labor to build it. So you're looking at the comparable method throughout the whole process. But what you're trying to do is to interpret the market. That's really what the job of the valuer is. And these are like three tools, like the hammer, the saw, and the chisel in a tradesman's bag that he has or she has to go and open up to then use to answer the questions which are being asked of them. So, Professor Sher, I don't know whether the other two questions. I'll put the difficult questions to you.
Okay, for this, actually, we have one question regarding the market approach for land, the cost approach for the buildings, and income for the livelihoods. Actually, it's quite complex for my personal view and experience, because market approach, I think, in the very developed market or countries or market, it's a market approach is good, especially in the urban. The land in the urban area and the real estate, the houses, the buildings in the urban area, it's okay. It's because we have a very good market, and we can quick transaction, between the different owner and user, we can change, and we can, through the negotiation, discussion, we have the full market. Every day we have many cases. It's okay. But if we're looking for the land in the rural area, especially in the developing or undeveloped country, we just have a few cases, even within 1 month or several months. So, because this is not really the full market, if we evaluate the land value, use the market approach, it's difficult because we cannot find very good, 3 substantial, the comparable assets, the similar, and also location and the value. So this is actually depends, but in general, I would like to say the market approach is mainly in the developed country or the city in the developing countries. I think it's a good approach. Even for in the urban area, for the buildings, for the real estate, for the houses, we also have the full market, very good market. It's also we can use the market approach. Whatever the business shops or residence houses or apartments, we have a full real estate market, so it's good. For cost, I think is special applied in the many statement. We cannot find the full very good market with 3 capable assets and to find the value of the similar assets. So cost approach is for my understanding, this is the reason why the international finance institutions, whatever include the World Bank, AIIB, NDB, ADB, we all highlight reference cost. So reference cost is fundamental rehabilitation. So reference the cost approach, I think it can be not only for the buildings, but also it can be used for land, because we can find the similar land. What kind of cost? Like we can find the to develop and or rehabilitate the new land. So this also can be used for the land. The income approach is good for some some livelihoods. It's also includes the business, includes the land, includes some industry, and those kind of assets not only for it's a value for is the assets itself. The very important, they generate the income, they generate the profit. So this we can use the income approach to evaluate what kind of value, what kind of this assets. But the difficulties is that its income is always change. This is the cost benefit. Its cost is also change. The market is change. So the prediction for the future is also difficult. It's also difficult to get agreement among the different stakeholders. So this is sometimes we say, oh, income approach is good, but it also depends the statement of the different evaluation assets and their nature, their conditions, their locations. So this is, I think I have different the factors to influence, to choose the good approach. So this is my understanding. And
okay.
We have another questions?
Yeah, I'll just jump in as well, because Professor Shi, that's a really good answer to that. But I think it's important to remember that it's the valuer's decision which approach to make. It's not the client doesn't tell the valuer which approach they would like to use on the valuation. It's the professional judgment of the valuer to use the appropriate methodology, but they should explain why they've chosen the appropriate method that they have. So that's part of that early discussion, that agreeing the terms of engagement. But it's not your responsibility to tell the valuer which approach to use. They should be recommending to you which is the most appropriate in the circumstances that you are presenting to them. Because there's some really interesting questions there about valuing parks and green lands and areas which are sort of outside of the normal marketplace. But that's really the skill of the valuer to be able to advise what the appropriate methodology is.
Thank you, Ben.
This is also the reason why we need the professionals to do evaluation. Yeah,
well said, well said.
Yeah, so now the questions are coming in hot and fast, and I'm actually struggling to capture them all, but let me just maybe do a couple about income approach. So people are asking, in the income approach, would you consider risks such as market, political, economical, and etc.? And how would you consider them? And then another linked question to the income approach. What would the income approach for an asset whose potential value and income is linked to the developments planned, but not in actual development, and whose implementation can be questioned? So I'm guessing someone is asking about the future, a future asset, which is not there yet. So maybe just take those two, and then maybe we move on to the next set of the presentation, and then take some more questions before we move on to the next session.
Sure. I mean, just picking up on that last one, again, you need to look at the legislation which is relevant in the country. So for example, I'm going to use the UK because it's one I know best, that there is within the law, you cannot take account of the actual scheme that is being developed. So if you're putting a new road in, for example, and that would increase the value of the land once the road is constructed, you're not allowed to take that into account in the compensation. So they call it a no scheme world, but they are different in different countries. So you need to understand that legislative framework within which it's operating. But it's a fairly common, because otherwise the taxpayer is paying twice for it. They would be paying the compensation for it and paying to have the road put in as well. So you need to look at the equation of being fair to the taxpayer as well as the recipient who's going to pay or receive the compensation. Professor Scherer, do you want to pick up the question which can't remember what it was, Ines, again. I'm sorry that my brain's not functioning too well. Not enough coffee yet this morning.
It's okay. So there's quite a few questions coming in. Maybe if you agree, we can leave these various scenario questions that are a bit long to read out for day 3. And then, I will prepare them and group them and share them with the speakers. I think we have one related to the actual valuation. Sorry, Zara.
Sorry, I was just going to say.
Yeah, please come in.
I just wonder whether we ought to move on to the easements because I'm just looking at the time, and then perhaps come back to questions after Professor Scherer finish that side.
Yeah. Sorry, Zara, you have your hand raised. Please come in, unmute yourself.
If I may follow up on the use of all 3 methods and applicability in usual applicability of different methods in social safeguards. And again, we are coming to that area of agreement between safeguard specialists and understanding of social impact assessment and replacement principle and restoration costs and approaches of valuators on how to assess the market and come up with market value. So 3 methods that have been shared already: market value, a market approach, cost approach, and income approach. Usually in involuntary settlement, first 2 are applied, as already mentioned by the presenters. It's mostly market approach for assets where there are existing markets. And there is a usual approach for structures in many countries to use cost approach when there are direct and indirect expenses that are considered without depreciation, as mentioned in almost all the policies of MFIs. And this is very important to mention in the TOR so that valuators know. There was a question in the chat about use of all three methods. And somebody shared in the chat the experience that it's from their experience, it's useful to use all the methods and then to result in a fair and verifiable market value, which is usually something that valuators do. And on the Ben's note of valuators' decision in terms of method to select to evaluate, in different countries, there are different approaches when we are implementing projects. And as safeguard specialists, you also have to understand what are you requiring valuator to do. And sometimes resettlement frameworks and settlement plans are also defining the approaches to the strategy to replace the assets and to restore the livelihoods. And that strategy also dictates the approach to compensation, to how we calculate the compensation and also allowances. And one last observation from one of our projects. So there was mainly comparative method used for land and cost approach to the structures. If there is a residential house, people would receive market value for the land based on comparable market approach, and replacement cost for the house based on cost method. But then looking at the market, we realized that market approach, comparable method, when it is applied, gives higher compensation than when we apply cost approach and just calculate materials for the structure. So the location of the land is influencing the replacement cost of the structures. So in this case, there was a valuator advice to apply across all the valuations in the project in a particular area, both methods, and to see what will be the fair market value for that particular property. So there is no final answer, but in general, in MFI finance projects, comparable land markets are more or less established, not in all countries, but in many of the countries. So comparable method is quite applicable. And for structures, it's a cost method. And for income losses, it depends on what type of income losses are we compensating and what is that restoration line that we are following. So if we are compensating businesses for business loss for specific time, to give them time to restore their businesses, it's not a compensation for their business, it's allowance to restore their business and not to compensate for the business loss. So there are some nitty-gritties there, and hopefully we will be able to discuss this also next week. Ben's advice to give freedom to valuers just triggered that small speech. Please, for safeguard specialists, try to see what valuators are proposing and try to match this to your social impact assessment data, to replacement and restoration strategy and story, and resettlement frameworks, plans, and also, of course, legislation. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Zara, so much. And I think Sue from AIIB wants to say something. So Sue, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, Ines. Good afternoon, everyone. From AIIB, we have two points to ask. But before adding the point in the discussion, I would like to introduce our new team member who just joined today, Mr. Raphael. He's a senior social development specialist of AIIB. Thank you, Raphael, for joining us. The first issue is that I saw some question on the chat box. If we can use all three approaches in valuation. Actually, valuers are not required to adopt more than one approach in valuation of land and assets, especially if the valuer have high degree of confidence in accuracy and reliabilities of the single approach to arrive at a conclusion. However, valuers are encouraged to use more than one approach, especially when there are insufficient factual and reservables input of the single approach to produce a reliable conclusion. And in our experience, the approaches have linkage. For example, if the income approach is used, then it means all the required information, or most required information of the market approach is likely have been collected. So using more than one approach to cross-check the value derived from one single approach is always helpful. That's our first point. Second point is that the key important thing is what factor determined the approach feasible and suitable in your valuation. That we always put in the TOR. That gives a justification why you use this. And then what should be the data, what should be the method, because each approach, we have several methods, not only one. And also in case none of the approach is feasible, so how we do with that? Maybe we have to combine all, but in each approach, we use multi-methods. So we come up with the conclusion. That's two issues we would like to say. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, if anyone else wants to add something from AIIB, please go ahead. So just a time check, we have about 15 minutes in this session. So yeah, please carry on.
Okay, evaluation of the instrument. Actually, we from day one we also talk about this case in LIBOR. It's regarding the transmission line corridor. Actually, so why we have to highlight this, because this is we have a regionally of the land easement, especially for some reasons like in practically factors in the our finance project, especially transmission line and corridor, because actually we don't need all the land within the corridor, but we will restrict the land use below the transmission line, and we can see this corridor maybe 40 meters wide or 60 meters wide. It depends on different voltage. So this is where we restriction for the buildings, restriction of some human being activities like farming and some FRICS activities. So this is some restriction for land use. Also, we have some ecological corridor, like we plan the green trees, especially along with the in some canals, or railway or highway, or we have some national park. Also, we sometimes due to the different, we also have the underground pipeline, but above those pipeline we have the land, so covered. But we still can use the surface, but we can not building any house and some facility above this pipeline. Also, we have corner plants, because we have a different, like the bridge, the highway, the canals. We have some land is less the value. Also, we have some reserve land, and for highway, railway extension. We have the reserve land for construction and acquisition. especially in the urban area. We have the conservation for the national park. So we also use some farmland for the ecological park or some conservation activities. So those will create out some issues. Is this easement? This is how to, because this restriction of land use, some projects don't allow any people can access. Some land can be accessed, but it's with conditions. So how to resolve those kind of easement, how to evaluate this kind of losses for this kind of restriction of land, I think it's very important. We have a different approach. For land, maybe we can give the like annual compensation for this land loss. Use the restriction use is this is based on the output of value as of variance between we have the comparable land and the subject land. So comparisons, what kind of difference restriction before restriction and after restriction? What kind of losses? So for those losses, we can give the compensation. Or we can replace the land physically. We find another place to restore, replace this, land. For house plots, it's compensation for the varies of the property use, restriction, and market value. Or we can replace the house plot, then rebuild and relocation. So this is also one of the approach to address this kind of value of the easement, some losses to compensate that. But this is, I think, is really the challenge, not only in the rural area, but also in the urban. When we do the urban pipeline, it's also many impacts for the shops, for the transportation. So this also carry out some losses. But actually now normally we don't pay any compensation. So this is valuation of the easement is one of the, I think, is a topic can be discussed later. So next page, please. So actually from day one and day two now, why we do the valuation for international finance institutions project? So this is a very important, actually, we want to evaluate the value of the whatever the land or assets or house, factories, infrastructures, actually is for land acquisition and associated properties, because we require the land for project. Then within the land, we have some associated properties, house, facilities, structures. We have to evaluate what is the value. Then for fair and reasonable compensation for this acquisition, because this property required, then we have to compensate. The compensation have to be the fair and reasonable, then can be acceptable by, affected stakeholders. It's also for cost estimation for reconstruction, rehabilitation of the property and the infrastructure, because our not only doing some acquisition displacement, but we need to reconstruct, rehabilitate. We have to restore the income, livelihoods. So this is also very important. How much land, how much money will be spent, what kind of cost needed. So this is also to evaluate of the cost for livelihoods restoration for affected people, enterprises, and some business. The very important is also for payments in public facilities and the infrastructure rehabilitation. These public facilities, not only in the agreed area, but also sometimes we also need to take account in the resettlement area. It's also, we also influence, displaced some road, some bridges, some power plant, many other infrastructures. But for this kind of rehabilitation, maybe we transit to some authority to do reconstruction. But how to pay, how to cost? So this is a reason why we do evaluation. But we do evaluation, we also have to take account what's the difference between the international finance project with the normal, the valuation of in the market approach, market purpose. Okay, next. So actually, this is one question. We also would like to suggest that we can have some discussion follow up today or in day 3. So actually, we because this is the valuation for the involuntary settlement and finance by the international finance project. So this is some evaluation for the bucket, like the sale transitions, and what's the same? The methodology approach is the same, or is similar, or is some difference, or whether we can combine to use a different approach integrator. So this can be discussed. And how to use this valuation approach, 3 different approach, how to apply them in our finance project. So this is to take account into the policy, into the rulers, into the standard, into the process. So this is very much how to use this evaluation. It's the standardized. Is we have the very, the professional. We can do that to have to apply. And when we apply that, any challenge, what kind of experience and lessons can be shared among the participants? So I think this is something arising, and I would like to suggest we can do some discussion, we follow up some QA. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Shi, very much. Ben, maybe if you want to reflect on, what Professor Shi has said, or we can move straight into a couple of questions, but I will give the floor to you, Ben, first, because I think these are quite a few salient points that Professor Shi has raised.
Sure, very, very quickly, because Professor Shi has given a great overview of the challenges and some of the solutions. But it's quite a wide implications. You have to look at the whole picture. For example, some banks who give mortgages on land do not allow easements to be introduced. So there might be knock-on effects. So if an easement goes across some land where a mortgage already exists, that mortgage might be terminated. So you have to look at all the policies that the affected people might be in receipt of. So it can be a much wider challenge than just a piece of land which is being taken, and there are different types of easements. There are rights of way, but then there are specific other types of easements. So again, understanding those nuances is really quite challenging, but a really big part of development bank work.
Great, thank you, Ben, so much. And here's a question that has some likes attached to it, so I guess people are very keen to understand the response. I will paraphrase the question slightly, but this is the question. How should easements which impose permanent restrictions on land use, such as constructing structures or planting tall trees, be valued and compensated? Should compensation be a one-time payment or an ongoing annual payment for the duration of the infrastructure's life? And then another quick one related to easements. So I'll take those 2, and then we can move on to session 2. Is there a time limit to which this annual compensation shall be paid for such land easement? So 2 questions for you, Professor Shi and Ben.
Professor Shi, you go first this time.
I think it's better to once payment is I think it's more better. much better. It's because actually it's the instrument. It also depends what kind of activities. If we occupy those land but not transfer the like ownership, you can pay the annually. But if you transition of some rights, maybe once you just pay once. So I think it depends the different nature and characteristics of this instrument. And so this is for my understanding that.
I concur with that. That's exactly what I would have said. And the only other part, there might be different elements to the project. For example, you might need a greater area of land to construct, so that you require an easement over a bigger piece of land. But when the pipeline or the overhead cables are operational, it might be reduced. So there's a sort of temporary process as well as a more permanent compensation element that might be appropriate. And really those need to be separated out and delivered in two different valuations, documents, agreements.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, colleagues, for that comprehensive overview. We've just explored the three basic valuation approaches and how they apply in various contexts, emphasizing the importance of adapting these methods to the specifics of each asset and project, what you just said, Ben. We were able to pick up some of your questions, and I mean, this is a huge topic and a very interesting discussion. Please do keep the questions coming. We will try to address all that we can today, and that what we cannot, we will address next Monday. So we will have a clinic session with our expert valuers, followed by a kind of a Q&A, a continuation of the clinic session with MDB colleagues, so ES practitioners in MDBs, ADB, AIIB, and NDB, and also supported by our valuers and expert speakers.